Hi, and welcome to Studying the Steps, a podcast from the Magdalen House, a recovery community for alcoholic women. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Dallas, Texas, and known affectionately by many as Maggies. In this series, we take a deeper dive into the 12 steps as outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, through discussion with an alcoholic woman active in our recovery community, and with me, your host, Kelsey Amos, a recovered alcoholic and the Next Step program manager at the Magdalen House. Their personal experience and knowledge of work in the program can give insight on how anyone can apply and practice the spiritual principles to improve their lives. Please note, the curriculum we teach through our programs at Maggie's is from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, we are not an Alcoholics Anonymous group, and we are not associated with AA. We're so glad you're here. Thanks for listening. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Magdalen House podcast for this episode of Studying the Steps. Today we are going to be talking about step 1, and we have on Laura Wilson. So Laura, do you want to introduce yourself for us?
Hi, yes. My name is Laura Wilson, and I am a grateful recovered alcoholic. I have been recovered since September 23rd of 2019, and I'm really excited to be here and talk about step 1.
Yay, I'm excited to have you.
Thank you.
So how did you find the Magdalen House?
Well, I had heard about the Magdalen House a few years prior to me actually being here. I had a friend that was recovered and was trying to help me in between stints in the mental hospital, and told me that I really needed to come hear the meetings at Maggie's, and I just wasn't ready. I had been living out of my car for about a year and a half, and I had run out of resources. People had mainly just kind of put up more boundaries, and I had nowhere to stay. And so I thought if I went to treatment that I could manipulate my dad into letting me stay with him. And I tried to call the first place that I went to treatment to, and they were completely full. And then I had remembered somebody mentioning the Magdalen House. And I called and phone screened, got in, and I kind of joked that I was bamboozled.
Why do you say that?
Because I had no intention of being recovered. And here we are. I thought, maybe at most I had to go 30 days without drinking, and it's been a little under 3.5 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's crazy.
So there's a lot of stigmas around alcoholism, just as far as like what people typically think it looks like, being a matter of willpower, et cetera, et cetera. What was something that you learned here at Maggie's to help you understand this as a disease?
My experience with 12-step meetings or any kind of recovery, yes, they would introduce the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but they never truly broke it down. They would kind of look at these steps on the wall, and you would just read over the steps, but you never truly knew what step 1 meant. I thought that I just had to say I was an alcoholic, and that was step 1. And I could admit that I was an alcoholic, but I had never truly accepted that I was an alcoholic. Being at Maggie's was the first time that I heard that it was a 2-part illness, that I can't control it once I put it in my body, and I don't have a choice when I try and stay away from it. And that was a game changer for me. For the first time, my drinking actually made sense. Like, it made sense why I drank the way that I drank. I think there's that stigma that you have to lose everything, your life has to be out of control, you have to be living under a bridge. And I know plenty of women who haven't had any consequences whatsoever. One of their biggest consequences is not remembering dinner or the night before. I, however, do have every consequence under the book. and that still didn't deter me. Like I said, I was I can't even say living out of my car. I was just passing out in my car in the bar parking lot, and then just coming to the next morning. And that particular bar opened up pretty early in the morning, and so I would just wait until they opened, and here I was.
Yeah. So in looking at step 1, what are some parts of the book that really helped you understand this and fully concede that this was your truth?
I think the chapter more about alcoholism, absolutely. Hearing the allergy broken down, for the first time, hearing that it's the problem of the body, I used to always think that I was just jinxing myself and saying, oh, I'm not going to do shots tonight. Or I'm only going to have wine. I thought if I said it out loud, then that was jinxing me to actually drink more and more and more. So hearing that body part and, hearing that I have an allergy, I always thought that that was something that old timers just said at meetings, or that people just said when they wanted an excuse not to drink, like, oh, I'm allergic to alcohol. I didn't know that it was a true, real thing, and that I can't ever change that allergy. There's no Benadryl or steroid shot or anything like that. Like, I am always an alcoholic. My second favorite part is in Dr. Bob's Nightmare. He has a quote where he's talking about, where he says, "It was really a horrible nightmare. This earning money, getting liquor, smuggling it home, getting drunk, morning jitters, taking large doses of sedatives to make it possible for me to earn more money," and so on. And that right there, that was my alcoholic life becoming the only normal one. That I could relate to an absolute T. And then his next sentence saying, "I used to promise my wife, my friends, and my children that I would drink no more. Promises which seldom kept me sober throughout the day, even though I was very sincere when I made them." And that was something that I learned is, obviously I don't have a wife, I don't have kids, but it was promises that I would make to myself, to my friends, to my family. And that was a promise that I could never keep. And that, I think, is one of the biggest commonalities that we have among us alcoholics. The third part that really hit home for me was on page 31 in More About Alcoholism, where they say, "Here are some of the methods we have tried. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever, with and without a solemn oath, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to health farms and sanitariums, accepting voluntary commitment to asylums." We could increase the list ad infinitum. And I think the only thing that I didn't do on here was drink natural wines, because I still don't really know what a natural wine is.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Organic wine, if it was from like Whole Foods or something, that was way too high bar for me. I couldn't afford it. I was more of a Sutter Home at the gas station, mini bottles. But I love that, because the beginning of it is just drinking beer only, and the very last thing is just accepting voluntary commitment. So we progress in our alcoholism with the delusion that we're not alcoholics, and we try these different methods. So as that delusion is progressing, my ways of trying to stop drinking become more and more intense. It goes, like I said, like, oh, I'm just going to drink beer, or oh, I'm not going to do shots, or no, I'm never going to drink at home, or I'm not going to drink on the job. And every single one of these, like, I even think I drank scotch at one point. I had like a summer where, Glenn Lovett was
The thing.
Yeah. And it's so gross.
Yeah, for sure. So what about because you talked about the allergy part of the disease, and then I think with what you just read out of More About Alcoholism, it starts getting into these methods of trying to control and manage, which kind of the mental obsession part. So what did that look like for you?
Oh gosh, that mental obsession, that creepy little voice in the back of our head. I am someone that, like I said, I had a bunch of consequences. Fear would sober me up for a little bit after that. Losing jobs, wrecking cars, going to jail. But ultimately, as time would go on and I would start getting my externals back, like getting the job back, finding a place to live, my mind would tell me, oh, I'm okay. I have money in my pocket. I have a job. Like, I'm doing well. I can keep drinking. Even when I wasn't, it was that constant, like, okay, don't drink today. Anytime I was in one of the mental hospitals, they always let you color. And so that was a big thing every time I got out, or I would try and stop drinking, is I would sit there and just try and color in a coloring book, or go on a walk outside, or just doing something to keep myself busy, to try and quiet that voice in my head that was telling me either, don't drink, or hey, you can drink because you haven't drank in a few days, or you're starting to get your life back together. I could never just be alone with myself. I always had to either stay busy to keep that voice quiet, or use things to not be sober.
Right. You mentioned earlier, like when you came to Maggie's, because you had been in treatment before, you had been to meetings before, you had been exposed to this stuff before, but it was different when you came here. Why do you think that was?
You know, I can remember sitting on my bed and going over the rules and the folder that they gave you and kind of having that moment of like, oh my God, what did I just do? Like, what did I just sign up for 2 weeks? And then I went and sat outside or sat in the living room. And this was at the old house where it was a very kind of a smaller living room and you had couches everywhere. And I can remember within 10, 15 minutes, there was about a dozen girls in the house, including myself, and the laughter. Oh my gosh. Like, I have never laughed so hard, especially being in treatment for half an hour. I mean, just getting there and just the laughter. And it was the first time that, you know, having that moment of like, you too, like you drank like this, like you don't understand why you're drinking like this, just not feeling alone and just having other people, like truly having the experience and the depth and weight from another alcoholic and showing that recovery is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Are you an alcoholic woman in recovery? At the Magdalen House, we host 12-step recovery meetings 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Whether you're a woman newly sober and wondering where to begin, or you've been in recovery for decades and are looking for other women to connect with, we hope you join us. You can find our meeting schedule and other fellowship opportunities at magdalenhouse.org/meetings. So the book often refers to the alcoholic as he or him, or, you know, they use male pronouns a lot. So did this ever deter you in any way when you first got sober, or maybe any time you attempted to get sober?
Well, anytime I tried to get sober, I never was working the steps. I never dived into the book. You know, it was never explained to me like they do here and make it so relatable. Somebody once said, like, find the emotion, like, and, you know, I did not know a lot about this book. I just knew that it was some, like, older man who wrote this, who was a stockbroker in the 20s and 30s, who was a war veteran. And I'm, you know, as we're going through this book, I'm like, well, I'm none of those.
Right.
Like, I have no experience in any of this. But after we got through Bill's story, and, you know, I've heard the book read as she, using the word she instead of he, and that helped it make it more relatable. But I just going through these certain pages and, you know, like reading, like we just read on 31, like I did that. I drank like that. So in a sense, no, it didn't necessarily deter me, but I had also never read and dissected this book or had it explained to me the way that they do it here.
Right. Right. And it sounds like you had the level of desperation and willingness required to work the steps no matter what.
After about 3 days, yes.
Yeah.
When I first got in here, you know, I thought, oh, it would be a breeze. And, you know, when it was broken down that alcoholism is in fact a disease and that we're not bad people, that we're sick, and it's this two-part illness of the body and mind, it started to make more and more sense. And I can remember I checked in about 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, and the 7 o'clock meeting that Thursday, you know, I've said this before, I don't know if it was just a complete full body, like mental breakdown, a spiritual experience, a panic attack, kind of all rolled in one, but I was just like sobbing, crying, like tears just flowing out, like snot just flowing out. Like I was hyperventilating so hard that I couldn't even get the words out. And I was sitting there just like, you know,
yeah.
And that moment of pure acceptance, like I can remember just sitting there and thinking, like, I have nothing left in my life. Like I had been robbed twice. I had no friends. I had no family. Like I didn't even have underwear for a year and a half. Like, so when I say I had nothing, I truly don't know how I kept my car. Like that is an act of God. It was beat up. My side view mirror was just dangling in the wind. It's kind of a metaphor of how I was. And I was sitting in treatment and I'm still thinking about how I'm going to drink. So that mental obsession was still there, even though I had been separated from alcohol for a few days. And just that moment of like, I will drink, I don't want to die. And like, what do I have to do? Like, I will do anything. And I didn't even know if this program was going to work. I didn't believe it, but I had tried everything else. And these women coming in and talking about their drinking and them seeming genuinely happy and content. And that happiness was something I was chasing down a bottle that I could never get. And this book just giving you an answer to every situation in life. I thought, you know what, I'm going to try it and I'm going to do this honestly and I'm going to follow the instructions of my sponsor. And if it doesn't work, then screw it. At least I'll die drunk.
That's powerful. I'm just sitting here like listening to you. I'm like, man, this is powerful stuff.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like I shouldn't be here.
Me neither.
Yeah.
And I think it makes a huge difference because kind of what I heard is that you were finally around women who had a message of depth and weight that you were ready and willing to hear.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's been a huge factor in my recovery is the women around me and surrounding me. And I know that you're active in the Maggie's community. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I was someone who, I don't really want to say I didn't have friends, but I didn't have can call you at 2 a.m. with anything friends. The people were more like acquaintances, and I really just didn't have a lot of females in my life. I have my two best friends that I've had, I've known for 31 and 28 years, something like that. But even, I had put them through so much too that even then they couldn't help me. But I have true relationships with women, and I am such a girl's girl now, and I love it. And I also live in sober living, so I have my roommates there and just the Maggie's community. And it's you can call anyone at any point, and it doesn't matter what point you're in your recovery. I have someone that I went through the house with back in 2019, and we had the same sponsor, and we would go through the same things at the same time in our recovery. And so just having that understanding, like I lost my mom, it will be 10 years ago this year. And I can remember when she passed, having that, I wish I had someone that, when you can have a conversation with someone and you don't have to explain anything. You don't have to explain who the people are or how you know them or anything like that. You can just have that conversation and they know. That was one of the biggest things missing in my life. Mm. And I now have that with the community of women here.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
That's so good. So have you ever encountered a woman who had a hard time identifying with the book, with step one, because of the male pronouns?
I don't know if it's necessarily the male pronouns. I think we have to get to a certain point, like it says in the book, we have to be beaten into a complete state of submission by alcoholism. My circumstances and my consequences and that total defeat is what gets me willing, and that willingness is what gets me to surrender. So sometimes I think it's not necessarily because of the pronouns used in the book. I think it's just, sometimes we have more drinking to do. Yeah. We're just not ready to hear that there's a solution, or we hear that there's a solution and that mental obsession has us so hard in its grips, we think that we have to prove it wrong. Because I always wanted to prove wrong that I was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
I'm not. I'm wrong. I am very much an alcoholic.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. There's two tests that this book gives you to see if you're an alcoholic. Is one, can I control it? Can I go over to the nearest bar or, have one or two drinks and just stop and continue to keep doing that? Or, can I give it up for a year?
What would you say to a woman who was having a hard time identifying with being an alcoholic and what the book says about step one?
Talk about my own experiences. That's how I started listening to these other women and hearing that, yes, believing that there was a solution. Yes, this book was written in 1939. Yes, it has some very strangely worded sentences in it. But when other women would go through this book with me and they would read it and then they would identify their experience and what was written in the book and how the book presents it, that's where I started getting on board with it. That's where I could say, that was me. Yes, I drank like that. Yes, I felt like that. Like I said, I didn't necessarily believe this program was going to work. I could see it in other people. I could see that miracle, but I didn't know if it would work for me.
Right.
And so just trying it, just being open-minded and just being willing and just being dead honest with my sponsor, you know, these promises, as a few of these promises started coming true for me, that's when I was like, oh my God, this thing is real.
Yeah.
And started believing it more.
I felt the same way. I was convinced that it wasn't going to work for me, but I just really had no other choices at that point. And I was like, okay, this is the one thing I haven't tried yet, so let's try it.
I almost wanted to prove you wrong. Like, well, I'll show you that this doesn't work. And again, I got bamboozled. So it worked.
What a beautiful thing.
It is.
That's so awesome. I love
it.
What does step 1 mean for you today?
Absolute powerlessness. Like, I am so powerless over alcohol, and it's powerlessness but freedom at the same time. I know that sounds like a complete oxymoron. And it sounds like it doesn't make sense, but I heard someone say once, if they could change the wording of step 1, it would say we accepted that we were alcoholics and that our lives had become unmanageable. That acceptance is truly what brought me to working these steps like my hair was on fire and that my life depends on it. And just because I have knowledge that my life depends on it doesn't necessarily keep me recovered. But, you know, I saw another quote that was like, I'm not recovered because of my step 1. I'm recovered because of someone else's step 12. And that's like somebody else taking the time out of their day to come talk and be like, hey, I understand completely where you're at. Like, you don't have to explain anything. Like, I know. And the good news is that there is a way out. It's simple, but it's not easy. But if you're willing to do it, you can have this life of freedom. And, you know, life still happens. Like, I can't say that it's been all sunshine and rainbows in my recovery, but I have the tools and I have the community and I have the fellowship that can get me through anything. So I don't feel like there's anything in life I can't handle.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So what would you want to say to someone who's listening? What would you want them to know about the Magdalen House?
Oh man, this place is just magical. They call it Magical Maggie's. You know, I just never thought that my life would look like this today and that I would have this group of women that I do. It is completely different than anywhere else that I've been. And it's so full of love, and there's so many resources, and the resources aren't just for the alcoholic, you know, it's for the family as well. Like, Maggie's is just a one-stop shop. You know, you can go and you can get the education that you need. You can volunteer to get out of your head and quiet that mental obsession voice. You can overnight and help the women who are in the house, like the overnight women helped you when you were in the house. You can get outpatient treatment as well. Your family can get support and you can help be of service. And it's just unlike any place ever that I've been. And I never was in a treatment center that I didn't want to leave, and I did not want to leave here. And so I haven't.
Yeah,
I just don't live here.
I was just thinking about that. Like, since I've been here, I've seen you a lot, like very involved. Like, I've seen you overnight. You were a regular meeting chair for a long time. You do some of our weekend workshops and stuff. And so it's just been really, really cool to see you staying involved and staying connected and plugged in. Do you think that that has made all the difference in your recovery?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I never thought that I would be on the other side of it or sitting on the other side of that table. I started carrying the message very early in my recovery, or shadowing and learning to carry the message. And I can remember, like, I don't know, the second or third time I went, the person that I was shadowing was running 20 minutes late, so I had to start the meeting. And I cannot tell you, it did not matter that I had just heard step 1 and page XXVIII and 54 times in 2 weeks. I blanked and everyone was like looking at me, and I was trying to draw the model, and I was so uncomfortable, but that uncomfortableness is what gets us closer to our higher power. And now it is the highlight of my week. Like, listen, I'm the laziest person ever. I love my Netflix. Like, sometimes I just don't want to do it. Like, I worked, I'm tired. I can think of a million different things that I would want to do. Mm-hmm. And then I think, well, it's only an hour out of my day. And, my mother used to tell me, like, if I didn't want to go to some social event, she would always say, well, go, like, you'll have fun. You'll never know, like, who you're going to meet, and it will be great. And usually I would go, and it would end up being great. And that's how it is with, going to 12-step meetings or carrying the message, or just, when I don't want to do things, I think of, again, somebody took the time out of their day to help carry the message to me. And without knowing that there was a solution, I wouldn't be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And for our listeners, we'll catch you next time.
This has been a Studying the Steps series podcast, hosted by Kelsey Amos and brought to you by the Magdalen House. I am Bryn Hansen, host of our Recovered Interviews with Alcoholic Women series. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Tune in every Wednesday for a new release from one of our 4 series. To learn more about the Magdalen House and the services we offer, visit magdalenhouse.org or follow us on your favorite social media channels.